Okay, good to see you all this morning.
You'll have to unmute, Roger.
Yes, thank you. All right, good to see you all this morning. I just got back. Let me turn a better light on here. Just got back from the Bahamas with my two boys, and I always enjoy spending time near the ocean. I lived by the ocean for a long time. Most of my, not most, but almost half of my adult life within a mile of the ocean. So I didn't appreciate it as much, but I appreciate it more now, the peaceful nature of it, and how he talked, I think earlier in the book, about how the ocean reminds us of no beginning, no end, the nature of reality there. And things as it is, what really drew me when I was reading this chapter was back in the chapter we covered on the river longs to return to the ocean. He quoted a poem by Hanyatara, who was Bodhidharma's teacher. And it goes, "When I inhale, I don't dwell upon things. When I exhale, I don't pursue thoughts. Thus I breathe the sutra, as it isness, hundreds of thousands of millions of times." So I think of this poem as a way we can kind of center ourselves, on practicing adopting kind of an unconditional, like welcoming, accepting attitude towards all of our experience. And he goes on to say that this is, about this poem, he says, this is the pinnacle of Zen, seeing things as it is. And when we see things as it is, if we're accepting things as it is, there's no need. We gradually realize and learn there's no need for our grasping or turning away from experience. In other words, being present here in the present moment is enough. That's all we need. And on this trip, I had lots of experiences of being challenged with accepting things as it is. My spacey son, they drove 4.5 hours from Wilmington to Rutherford County, where my mom lives and I live, and to go on this trip. And they got 4 hours into the trip, and I called up Nikki. I said, "Nikki, we need your passport info." And he looks at his passport and it's expired. It's the one that was expired. He brought the wrong one. So I'm saying, "Oh, geez, now you can't go on the trip." He goes, "No, I can go. I'm going to turn around and go back, and get it." And it's like, there's tornado watches and it's storming and it's raining. And I'm like, "You're not going to go drive all the way back there and do it." But he did it, and we got there. And then 2 days later, he left his computer outside on the terrace of the balcony of the hotel room, and it rained and his computer died. And then he goes, "Dad, how come you're so frantic about traveling all the time?" And I said, "Well, it's my spaciness that you inherited from me. There's just too many things that can go wrong." So I on the one hand, there's that great peacefulness of the ocean here supporting me in my anxiety, in kind of a refuge, of like, okay, it's okay. I have to learn to be welcoming towards my anxiety here, and it's not my fault. It's not anybody's fault. It's things as it is. So patience is very important, in learning to accept things as it is, and not to have that continual need to grasp our experience or to turn away from it. And I think that, things as it is a phrase that Kwon Roshi learned from Suzuki Roshi. Suzuki Roshi used that phrase a lot in his teaching. And to me, it seems like it's kind of an expression of how the reality of the phenomenal world, or things, objects of our thought, the singularity of things, and the duality of reality itself are one and the same. So things as it is the combination of singularity and duality as one ungraspable, empty not perceivable or not describable reality. So, observing things as it is our opportunity to cultivate the freedom for looking deeply in our investigation of ourself, our separate self, our small self, and the big self that is our true nature. So there's a paragraph on page 200 here where he says, we practice this by simply investigating what is behind everything, the thoughts of the thinker. Where do they actually come from? The sound you just heard, the cup you just saw. This investigation may be made using all 6 senses. As you continue this investigation, you will find that there is nothing behind. There is nothing to see, and yet something has been seen. Otherwise, it couldn't be recognized. This recognition is our pure and natural awareness. It is not mind-made. This is the non-thing that can recognize things as it is. And then he goes on, when our inherent pure awareness is turned on or paid attention to, without any effort, thoughts vanish so that no thoughts can exist in this spaciousness. So, this I really appreciate this paragraph, because Zen teachers don't, at least in my experience, Zen teachers have a way of talking about this type of investigation without going into much detail. And so I like he says, we investigate it with all our 6 senses, but teachers like Rupert Spira, although the spirit is the same, he goes into more detail about how to actually do that. What is the actual nature of sensation? What is the actual nature of thinking? What is the actual nature of our seeing, our hearing? And so when I do that, it's kind of helped me to see that by looking deeply, maybe there really isn't anything to be afraid of. There's nothing separate from us. If we explore the nature of sensation, one exercise I've tried is if you close your eyes and just imagine you're a young infant and you don't have any memories, you have no objective memories or anticipations of the future, and you reach out and touch something that we normally think of as a solid physical object, all you would know is there's a sensation of touch, but you wouldn't know, there'd be no knowledge that it's a physical object, that it's something outside you. And so it's just thought. This is what he means when he says that dividing line between the inside and the outside world is just made of thought. And there's no real reality to it other than the belief that there's an outside reality, that we are this outside, that we are separate from this outside reality that we imagine. And one way of expressing it is the spiritual path can be, when we're in that duality, that dualistic framework and kind of embedded in it and attached to it, we think of it as a journey to God or to our source, to enlightenment. And then when we realize, through long practice, we realize that is just made of thought, separation is just made of thought, the journey continues, but then it's the journey in God or in our source. And that journey in God, enlightenment, is boundless, is endless, because we're in that space where the inner world is limitless and the outer world is also boundless. And the dividing line has dissolved. And there's no end to the journey, but there's a freedom in the journey. And we begin to realize that, when he says, in that open space, no thought can survive, it's important for me to kind of articulate to myself, that doesn't mean the absence of thinking. It means the absence of our attachment to thinking. But the energy is still just flowing. But, thought isn't what we think it is. It's no longer thought because it's not, we don't know what it is. So it's no longer thought. So thoughts as we normally experience them is something to grab onto or to turn away from are no longer there. So but it's not the extinction of our thinking, of the energy of thought. But when that boundary line is divided, that divides us, begins to dissolve, then we realize that it's our experience, our sensory experience in all its forms. They arise within us, the presence we are, and that actually it's our awareness is taking the form of experience. It's not relating to something outside of itself. So when we surrender to just this awareness, just we are, the awareness of being present, experience begins to become transparent to this awareness, to this source. In other words, we kind of see the source while we're experiencing, seeing, hearing, thinking, and feeling. We don't lose the awareness of the source. And Rupert says, it's like images on the movie screen become transparent to the screen when we see there's no real outside world there. The screen pervades the images on it that appear on it and are made of it, just like our experience appears on the screen of our presence, aware presence, and is made of that. So there's nothing out there for us to be afraid of. So we begin to experience directly in our actual experience that awareness itself totally pervades, totally saturates all of our experience. And we keep opening to this possibility, with compassion and generosity, with our resistance, bringing that compassion and generosity to our resistance and letting it penetrate our resistance instead of resisting or grasping, avoiding our resistance. And another analogy that Rupert uses, someone asked him, I've been on this path for 40 years or something like that, and I'm still not getting it. Why am I not enlightened, kind of thing, I'm really trying, I'm doing everything. And she says, well, so he uses the analogy of the movie and the screen, and he says, it's like, instead of paying attention to the source of yourself, it's like you're looking for an event in the movie that's going to give you lasting happiness. You're on the screen and you're ignoring the screen and you're trying to find something in this outside world we imagine we are that's going to give you lasting happiness. And so to me, it's a powerful metaphor. And you could tell the woman was like, oh yeah, kind of thing, that maybe she really got it. Not that she's but maybe there'll be some compassion and some awareness for when the next time that thought arrives and she starts to indulge in it. Well, I haven't got it. It's separate from me, kind of thing. That maybe she can see what she's doing, get this awareness of what she's doing. So, that realizing that, that it's like looking for an event in the movie, in the dream, we can realize that our seeking for something outside of us, it's a distraction from paying attention to what is actually here, paying attention to our actual experience and our actual source. And we think that it veils, we get this, that our true nature or the real nature of reality is veiled. The peace, obviously, if it's all peaceful and accepting and totally all pervading and loving in the recognition and compassionate, if that's the way it is, then it must be veiled for me because I don't experience that, right? So another way that helps me, I'll try to use this analogy briefly, but it's like when you think of consciousness as a vast river, and the currents and the ripples in the river are like the contents of our consciousness, our experience. And it's all floating, just this endless flow, right, of experience. And so in the river, at some point, there's a change, and the water starts to swirl, and it forms into a whirlpool. So it's kind of a localization of the river. And you can say that these vast energies of the cosmos start to swirl around, and all of a sudden a human being is formed. It's all these energies coming in and going out, or receiving energy and putting energy out just by our presence. And it's like a whirling of a whirlpool. And so there's this constant receiving of all these different currents, ripples, and then for us it's experience, seeing, hearing, thinking, feeling, conditioning, and we're taking it in, we're giving it out, and there's just this continual flow. So when he says at the end, he says, not at the end, but later on page 200, he says, this is not a difficult thing, this pure awareness without any effort. This is not a difficult thing because you're already doing it. It's just that you haven't recognized it. So the metaphor of the whirlpool, to me, is really powerful just in that sentence where he says, we're already doing it. We're always doing it because we are just this whirlpool of energy coming in and going out and coming in. And we don't have any more control over it than the whirlpool has over the flow of the river. It's obviously the power of the river that swirls and forms the whirlpool. The whirlpool doesn't form itself. The power of the river forms itself. So the power of the cosmos is constantly giving us as gifts our experience, and it's flowing out of us, and we have absolutely no control over it. So if we can learn to surrender to that flow, we'll still feel pain because our bodies are, programmed to survive, but there can be an acceptance of it, and then when the whirlpool starts to, they don't just vanish, they kind of gradually unwind. So when I tell my kids, my spaciness, it's not getting better with age because I'm, my whirlpool is starting to unwind here, kind of. It's just a natural process of life. So anyway, I hope that's clear. I know if we're not used to thinking in those terms, it's not easy to assimilate, but let's have some discussion about it, about the chapter.
Roger, thank you for your talk. I was thinking about our group, and one of the great things is, having you here is like having an old hand among us. It's really, really great. Who's sort of walked in all the great shoes of the last 30 years and 40 years in Zen. I always appreciate the fact that you can see what someone said on a particular day and time, how those things have done. It's also gratifying for me to hear that for all your Zen study and all your wisdom, all your profound thoughts, that you haven't been unable to transfer much of that to your children. Same thing with me. It's that in the end, I don't know what I was able to teach anyone. I was sort of an incompetent parent and a competent teacher, sort of stumbling through life, and I studied these profound things. But in the end, we're just doing it, and I think that things just as they are is the most beautiful sentence that there is. That's what it is, and that means that it's not just the lotus flower and the goldfish. I live in a hippie commune. We have a pond that flows year round with goldfish swimming in it right by my house. Mm. That's easy. Lauren Boebert and Margaret Taylor Greene are not as easy. but they are just as they are too. And right. It's always been such. It's been such after I die. The question is do we bless this world or curse it? That's the choices. We bless it or curse it. Someone say, well, maybe it's neither. Maybe we're just in it. Maybe we just experience it. I love my analogy of the baby reaching out his touch. It's great line by Neil Young, who's a profound Zen master. Neil Young says, I am a child. I last a while. You can't conceive of the pleasure in my smile. Mm. Yeah. And I said, that's a smile of recognition. We say, oh man, I get it. So I really think that, you're an old wooden barrel Roger, that the Scotch has been there for 40 years, and it's aged, and it's got good oakiness, and it's strong, and it's got character, and it's got depth to it. So it's where we are right now, a beautiful stage of your lives. We appreciate your wisdom and your guiding us here. So for me, it's a great gift. Thank you.
Oh, well, thanks. It's also, there's a lot of tears involved. I wasn't here when we talked about the dead fawn and the sadness, because I had a lot of sadness on the trip too, because this might be the last time that I go on a trip just with them, kind of thing. I don't know, but when I had a lot of grief when my youngest son left for college last fall, and you mentioned Neil Young. I walked into a grocery store, and they were. It was the day after he left, and I was feeling kind of, man, this is sad. Both boys are gone, and all. It was Neil Young. They played on the loudspeaker in the grocery store, and he's singing, "Oh man, look at my life. I'm a lot like you were," or whatever, kind of thing. And it's like, it really hit me with the tears, kind of. So that's an important part of it. Anyway, one thing, and then I was looking at my younger son on the trip. He's so adroit with the phone. He's like going through all this stuff, and I'm thinking, hey, I got to do this, I got to do that. And he's like, and I'm like, man, you're really great at all this. And he goes, no, Dad, you're just horrible at it, And that's things as it is, just the way it is. Yeah.
Thank you, Roger. As I listen to your talk and examining the senses or using all the senses to really, I guess, accept things as they are. Last week we talked about the dead fawn and grief and suffering, social justice. And in particular, I talked about my resistance to DeSantis and what's happening in Florida. And afterwards we sat and something awakened in me. I was thinking about my resistance to DeSantis and how it's the same as his resistance to wokeness, And I understood the chapter then when the monk says, my mind is just like the fawn, it wants milk. And as I was listening to you, my question was, how do we practice this non-resistance, this acceptance? Because I think for me, I know it, I understand it as you're talking intellectually. I understand it, but then invariably I go into the resistance, and the non-acceptance, like how can I accept injustice? And just examining it, I realized, as you invited us to do, experiencing it with all our senses, and it's a deep fear.
Yeah.
That fear, what might happen, or how we may go backwards, or how people may suffer more. And so it's this practice of how do we really practice this acceptance of things as it is? That was a question in my mind.
Yeah.
And I guess accepting that question is what you're saying. Even that is things as it is.
What some teachers have told me along the way that helped me when I have that exact same question, how do we practice it? First of all, realizing that I by myself can't do it, can't practice it. So we need help. That's why, even though the best way we can really help people is when we're kind of beyond the need of help, still we need other people where we are at and where I'm still at, regardless of what it seems like to people. I need help. So Sangha, if I go off on a mountain, I'm not going to progress anymore. It's just, I need help. We need help with the conversation. The Zen practitioner is a conversation about it. But us by ourselves, as we think of ourselves as separate beings, can't do the practice. So it's a matter of opening up and surrendering and offering. Like Reb Anderson has said, I think I've mentioned that the way to be a free thinker is not to be a great thinker. It's to not grasp at thinking, but offer your thinking as a gift. Calmly offer it as a gift, and that way it doesn't disturb the deep tranquility that's possible when we just open up and receive the nature of our pure awareness. The way we can realize that we are just this vast openness, that's there every moment of our life, is by paying attention to that instead of our self-centered thinking about how I can do it, about how I have to practice better.
I'm trying to apply all this to the reality of death. And, that this, once in a hospital years ago, one of the people that worked there, he was one of the staff, said, "This is a death denial culture," which I knew. And last night, just to distract myself, I watched the Academy Awards just so that I didn't have to deal with feeling the loss of my friend.
Yeah.
And, it seemed like some gigantic, in a way, bizarre parade of fools, And then I thought, we do all this because we try to avoid the pain of loss. We put on the makeup and we put on all the dress design, because facing death, the fact that we're here and then we're gone, no one has the answers, except I think the Buddha did. And this awareness must be very profound if we really experience it.
Mm-hmm.
It must be what people call God.
Mm-hmm.
And someday I'd like to really grasp what you're talking about. Not grasp, but, understand it.
Yeah.
And you have to face the pain of loss in order to do it. And I realized, without going into a whole more thing, I grew up very numb because of my childhood home. And when you take away, like the scab, the numbness, you're hit with these very profound and deep feelings that you have to deal with. And I guess that's part of the path too. Yeah. And I thank you all for being here this morning so that I could have someone to express this to. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks, Donna. I was going to say, I would really like to grasp what I'm talking about also. Because if it looks like I'm grasping it, it's not true. because it's not graspable. That's the thing, and you can't grasp it. There's no way.
Pay no attention to that man behind the screen.
Right. But I really appreciate your it would be nice to have talk about death. Well, I talk about Reb Anderson a lot. I asked him about that. What happens after we die? I mean, he was visiting me maybe 15 years ago or whatever, and he goes, well, my experience is that, whether there's rebirth or not, the momentum of the practice, because he thinks of it as a practice, he's very much practice oriented. The momentum of the practice continues, which is pretty non-committal, but I mean, to use the movie screen images on this movie, images of the movie on the screen, it's like the screen, the images disappear, but the screen remains. But what's going to reappear on the screen, we can't know. But the screen doesn't disappear. It's not a perfect metaphor, but somehow there's going to be continuation. Yeah.
I just would like to say that if there is rebirth, I hope that I get to know all of you again.
Yeah, me too.
I would really like to continue knowing you guys.
Yeah,
yeah. And I mean, I don't give a damn about millions of dollars or Mercedes or all this stuff that, people are concerned with getting. I just would like to know you guys and people like you again. Thank you.
Same here.
Just it's a reincarnation you did.
Yes. Yeah.
Thank you, Roger. I found it to be a very stimulating chapter once again because, like you, I often look within Zen and I don't find what I need in terms of a direct path, shall we say, in terms of how do we do it?
Yeah.
What is it that we're doing to begin with? And then the exercise that you gave in terms of baby reminded me, because there is something that's quite enchanting, and when you watch a young child, without the speaking, ability, that they are experiencing things and touching things and smiling, crying, and laughing, all these responses to things, they're quite alive, right? I mean, they are sensation, perception.
Yeah.
They're there all the time. And I was reminded of, I used to do again, being in college in the early 70s was a drug-filled fest, to say the least. And I did a lot of LSD along the way, 100 plus times easily, with a lost count with that. And what I realized in those trips was I was like a child. I was living it out in terms of picking things up, and holding them, or whatever it may be, looking at things, listening to music. There was this first time appreciation. I'm alive. Holy shit, I never saw this before. My wife and I did a bike ride and we went to see a solar eclipse. Again, there was just some crazy experiences along the way. And I think for me, it's like people always look to Zen, or seekers, shall I say, look to Zen, or it's kind of like there's a game in terms of who influenced who. Did Buddha influence Jesus? Did Buddha influence the first Advaita people? There's this. Did the Advaita people influence the? It's all this conversation. Which was first? Were the Upanishads, and which Upanishad? It's this conversation trying to find utility or value or preeminence, or I don't know what it's this constant search. But I think what's there, and I think a story came to me of an experience came to me. I worked in a mental health center. A friend of mine saw an attorney who had very serious OCD, obsessive compulsive disorder, and he would go out to pick up the attorney in the waiting room. And the attorney, he'd call the attorney back. I'd just say it was his occupation. He was quite a bright guy. And the guy would spend the next 15 minutes picking up lint on the floor on his way back to my friend's, therapy office. It was that serious. He could not see a piece of lint on the floor. But it was this whole process of gathering information. And for me, Claudette, it comes into this, what we do, because I think we're like scientists, or we have OCD. It's kind of like we go through all these machinations and all these conversations with ourselves and all these deliberations about our feelings towards other people, our feelings towards social injustice, but eventually we have to act, right? That OCD guy has to eventually get into the therapy office and start working on the OCD. We gather information, but eventually we choose our course, right? And we choose our action. We decide, we jump off the ledge, right? I mean, we take it. It's never that we don't use the information, right? If we sat there catatonic, you know, for the rest of our lives and eventually died from lack of eating or movement or whatever it may be, eventually you have to move, right? I always find it interesting in terms of Camus. I used to talk with people and use Camus in suicide situations because, you know, eventually you got to act. Eventually you do something, right? I mean, you look at the Marjorie Taylor Greens and the Boberts, and you decide how you're going to channel your energies or do something with that. And I think that constant recognition of what we do, and to me, it really doesn't matter what happens after death, right? It didn't matter before this birth thing occurred, and I suspect that the same thing is probably true. Well, you know, once this body you know, shuts down, there's probably going to be nothing. For me, that's very peaceful, right? When I go to sleep at night, and if I am in deep sleep, it is just what it is, right? I mean, it is. There may be a dream sequence, maybe different than the dream sequence I live out, but there, you know, it's a dream sequence, and I think when you shut your eyes and die, you know, I don't think there's going to be a whole hell of a lot going on. My best bet says no, because the supposition, you know, it's kind of like the Einstein thing. Can a mind that created this really solve its own problems, right? I mean, can the mind really think outside of itself? And so we look to these solutions and the best examples and the best reasoning and the best. We create this notion of best. And we create this notion of value. There is nothing behind it. I mean, there is. Yeah. Just this is it. Just this is it. Yeah. With that, in many forms, with that, and so your talk stimulated, as did the chapter. With that, thank you.
Interesting. Yeah, interesting, because he says when you look behind, or if you think of in terms of a background awareness that's the witness to all of this, there's nothing behind. You know, but then, is there such a thing as nothing? You know, is another question. Or then, when we finally do act, what or who is acting? What is really? There's all that stuff. So, yeah, the deepest questions always lead to deeper questions. There's no end to the questioning.
And yet we still act. You know, without complete. What's complete?
But, you know, if we really get that we can't control what's going on, then whatever happens or doesn't happen, it's not in our control. And learn how not to control it, self-consciously control it now. You know, it'll be whatever, it'll be easier. Because, you know, when death comes, it'll be now. It's only now, you know, it'll be now. And then when it comes, and we'll think, yep, we were right. We said it was going to be now, and it's now, you know, kind of thing. So accept that now.
And for me, and with the lack of complete knowledge, whatever that complete knowledge, you know, the phrase itself, whatever that means, with the lack of complete knowledge, I think for me, the sound path, or the path that has the most integrity, is compassion. Again, in terms of being able to, if you don't know better, you know, kind of like don't do harm, right? I mean, if you can live that, if that can be a practice, it's, you know, I think it's practicing in terms of not acting in a way that harms other people or can help other people not feel anything untoward with
Right.
that is,
Mhm.
counter to what we create, in terms of our experience with that.
Yeah. Mhm.
Any other thoughts before we chart forward? Okay. May all beings be happy. May they be joyous and live in safety. All living beings, whether weak or strong, in the higher, middle, or low rounds of existence, may all beings be happy.